Coming up on Network Africa, Ethiopian government denies the World Health Organization's claim on Tigray aid blockade. The U.S. calls on African nations not to remain neutral on the war in Ukraine. Plus, the United Nations says more than 1 million people in southern Madagascar currently need food handouts. To the program today, I'm Layo Adegoke here in Lagos. Ethiopian government has denied claims that it is blocking aid from reaching the Tigray region where there has been conflict for more than a year now. The World Health Organization Director General, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus, had called on the government to end the blockade that has hampered humanitarian supplies delivery to Tigray. But Ethiopia's communication minister said the WHO should blame the Tigray People's Liberation Front for the blockade and not the government, adding that the rebels had deliberately blocked access. Some supplies have been delivered to the conflict-hit region, but the WHO says more is needed for the people. The conflict in Tigray began in November 2020 when Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed ordered a military offensive against regional forces. More than 1 million people have been left homeless. The U.S. ambassador to the United Nations has said that African states cannot remain neutral on the war in Ukraine. Mrs. Linda Thomas-Greenfield noted that in the General Assembly vote 2 weeks ago to deplore the Russian invasion of Ukraine, 17 African countries, half of the world's total, abstained, and another 8 did not vote at all. The ambassador has said there can be no neutral ground and that this crisis is not simply a Cold War competition between the West and Russia. The diplomat also said the U.S. would support South Africa's offer to mediate between Russia and Ukraine. In the meantime, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa is blaming NATO for the war in Ukraine, adding that he would resist calls to condemn Russia. President Ramaphosa says the war could have been avoided if NATO had heeded the warnings from amongst its own leaders and officials over the years, and its eastward expansion would lead to greater, not less, instability in the region. The South African president, said rather than take an expected adversarial approach, he wants to focus on mediation, as war is unlikely to lead to a resolution.
The war could have been avoided if NATO had heeded the warnings from amongst its own leaders and officials over the years that its eastward expansion would lead to greater, not less, instability in the region. Our position is very clear. And I did say that there are those who are insisting that we should take a very adversarial stance and position against, say, Russia. And the approach that we have chosen to take, which is appreciated by many, is that we are insisting that there should be dialogue. What is happening out there is undesirable. It is not what should be happening between nations. War, violence never really solves any problems. And it is for this reason that we say we would prefer and we insist that there should be mediation, there should be dialogue, and there should be negotiation. Now, I am pleased to continue hearing, and having heard it from President Putin himself, to continue hearing that the negotiations are ongoing and they are making progress. Now, for us, this is an important development. Whilst other people scream and shout, We want to focus on the outcome, the positive outcome of those negotiations and that mediation process. That is what is important.
Meanwhile, the African Development Bank, AFDB, says it plans to raise $1 billion in a week's time to support agricultural production in Africa and to shield the continent from potential food shortages arising from the ongoing Russian invasion of Ukraine. Most African countries rely on the two warring nations for their grain supplies. Somalia, Benin, Egypt and Sudan top the list of countries that heavily rely on Russia and Ukraine, with more than 70% of their wheat coming from the two countries. AFDB President Akinwumi Adesina says the AFDB sees these increases in prices of wheat, maize and soya beans as potentially going to worsen food insecurity and also raise inflation. The multilateral lender says it will convene a meeting of finance and agriculture ministers in Africa to roll out a plan. Through the fund, AFDB targets to increase production of wheat, rice, maize and soya beans using climate-resilient technologies, including heat-tolerant and drought-tolerant crop varieties. The heat-tolerant wheat variety has already been trialled in Sudan and Ethiopia. Two other stories now. The authorities in the Central African Republic say they will delay the country's first municipal elections in 34 years, citing a lack of funds. The elections are scheduled for the 11th of September, but the head of the Elections Authority, Matthias Muruba, says they are behind in organizing the elections and they will not be able to take place on the planned date. Mr. Muruba had on Wednesday told lawmakers that the authorities did not have the $15 million needed to hold the elections. Since December 2013, repeated conflict in South Sudan has caused the displacement of civilians, conflict-related sexual violence and other human rights violations. Recent weather shocks also seen from prolonged floods has also caused the displacement of people. Well, there's an estimation that shows that about 4 million South Sudanese continue to remain vulnerable due to conflict and insecurity. However, as communities continue to suffer because of these repeated conflicts, it's become difficult for returnees and displaced people to go back to their homes.
Equatoria. A recent two-day training by the United Nations mission in South Sudan's Protection, Transition and Reintegration section brought together participants from South Sudan's Central Equatoria state to discuss the role of South Sudan's Relief and Rehabilitation Commission, SSRRC, and local authorities in managing returns and the reintegration of internally displaced people and returnees.
With the signing of the revitalized agreement on resolution of conflict in South Sudan in September 2018, the warring parties committed to supporting conditions for return of civilians to their homes with the promise of confidence building through reconciliation and dialogue.
It is envisioned that SSRRC will be at the forefront of guiding displaced and returnees as they find their way back home.
This workshop today aims at enhancing the capacities of all stakeholders responsible for managing return and reintegration at county level, state level, to effectively discharge their responsibilities, including managing the relationships between host communities, IDPs, and returnees.
Given the relative peace South Sudan has been experiencing and the need to have returnees and IDPs return to safe and secure environments, the SSRRC helps to foster a dignified relocation and resettlement into host communities, but this is not without any challenges.
We cannot talk about the protection of civilians and then the returns and reintegration of the IDPs before understanding what could have been done first
Despite the challenges, SSRRC is asking for partners to help the country manage a successful returns process, but is also calling for a safe and secure environment.
We need to prepare in order to resettle our displaced persons. Without leveling the ground for the displaced persons, we will continue to see relapse of violence, and that will discourage the IDPs and returnees, voluntary returnees, to come back home.
Those attending the workshop were drawn from key state institutions involved in policies that impact services and protection needs of displaced and returnees, stakeholders in land allocation, rule of law and social justice for displaced. Some of the institutions include the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Physical Infrastructure and State Land Commission, the Ministry of Gender, Child and Social Welfare, and Interior.
United Nations Agency World Food Programme says more than 1 million people in southern Madagascar currently need food handouts. The food crisis in the south built up over a period of years and has interconnected causes, including drought, deforestation, environmental damage, poverty and population growth, as according to local authorities and also aid organizations.
The fertile corner of southern Madagascar is turning red, a consequence of 4 years of drought that has transformed the area into a dust bowl. With precious few trees left to slow the wind, red sand blows over roads and villages and into the eyes of children waiting for food aid parcels. Children like 4-year-old Avoraza. His mother, Tarira, has brought him to a World Food Programme post in the Androy region. A checkup shows he's malnourished, though not severely so. A short walk from the village, Tarira demonstrates why he's been going hungry. This is the village where residents harvest their crops. Tarira says strong winds blew away the corn shed being cultivated. Insects ate anything that was left.
There's nothing to harvest. That's why we have nothing to eat, and we are starving.
More than 1 million people in southern Madagascar currently need food handouts from the WFP. That's amid a food crisis that has built up over the years. Deforestation, environmental damage, poverty and population growth are among the interconnected causes, so says local authorities and aid organizations. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change projects droughts will increase and says rising aridity is already being observed. It's a stark contrast to Madagascar's global image, a lush natural paradise with one of the world's most diverse ecosystems. Androy's governor, Soja Lahimaro, says the reality on the ground has changed.
It's logical that it's the deterioration of the environment that led to all this trouble, not only in Androy, but also in Madagascar as a whole. We used to call Madagascar the Green Island, but sadly, now it is more of a red island, actually.
At the height of the food crisis, the World Food Programme warned that Madagascar was at risk of the world's first climate change famine. But the WFP's bureau chief for Madagascar's hardest hit areas says the worst of the food crisis is over. That's after months of intervention by the WFP, other aid organizations and local authorities. Severe malnutrition among children has dropped from 30% a few months ago to 5%. But in rural areas where people live in dire poverty, some of the trends that have contributed to the crisis persist.
You're watching Network Africa on Channels Television. Still ahead on the program. A Tunisian engineer builds a 3-wheeled solar electric car at a competitive cost. More details in a moment. Please stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, is holding technical discussions with the Tunisian authorities on their reform intentions and on the economic reform program, which they recently shared with the IMF. During a press conference, Gary Rice, head of communications department at the IMF, says the body received from Tunisian authorities a request for a new IMF-supported program, and this coming even as a small staff team from the IMF plans to visit the country for further discussions.
Tunisia, as you probably know, we have received from the Tunisian authorities a request for an IMF supported program. The IMF has always been and will continue to be a strong partner for Tunisia. So over the past several months, we've been in close consultation with the Tunisian authorities. We've had technical discussions on their policy intentions and their economic reform program to consider launching a new financing support program from the IMF. What I can tell you, Delphine, a small staff team from the IMF plans to visit Tunisia for further discussions with the authorities later this month. Okay, later in March, to build on what I would characterize as the good progress that has been made in understanding their reform policies.
Welcome to our Africa Tech segment. Tunisian engineer Boubacar Saila and founder of Tunisian-German startup W.H.O Motors has built a three-wheeled solar electric car, hoping to provide an alternative to fuel-powered engines. Well, he hopes to provide an opportunity to live in a clean and healthy environment using solar energy.
Has designed a three-wheeled electric car powered by the sun, hoping mass production could provide a greener alternative transport for the city's residents. The founder and CEO of Tunisian-German startup W.H.O Motors designed the prototype during the pandemic and produced a model intended for delivery services and urban transport. At a fraction of the cost, the car was entirely built by a team of Tunisian engineers who designed its engine to run approximately 17,500 kilometers per year just by harnessing power from the sun.
The W.H.O Motors car has a very low operation cost future because there are these photovoltaic cells that give solar energy directly to batteries and allow the car to drive 50 kilometers per day for free, meaning 17,500 kilometers per year for free, and we know the cost of fuel and fuel problems. So this car that runs on clean energy can reduce the operation cost by 10 times compared to a car that runs on fuel.
Siala got the idea during the COVID-19 pandemic period when he takes leisure rides with his son.
The idea began during the period of the COVID-19 pandemic. My son Ibrahim and I always rode bikes, and he gets tired during the ups and downs of the road. So he told me, why not change the bike to an electric bike? And when we changed it, I discovered that it was not a difficult process. So we said, why not try to change the cars from fuel to electricity? Then we thought to make an electric car from scratch, and right there, the dream began. We, the people of the globe, have become fed up with the smoke coming out of cars. So this car gives an opportunity to live in a clean and healthy environment using sustainable and renewable energy, which is solar energy.
By the end of 2023, Siala and his team will have completed production of a four-wheeled car with the same specs for public use.
We move to Algeria now, opening a fishing vessels manufacturing workshop at the port of Zemmouri, 50 kilometers east of Algiers. 74-year-old Algerian Ali Chauche aims to manufacture ships to meet local demand and also to export globally.
Opening a ship manufacturing workshop at the port of Zemmouri, 50 kilometers east of Algiers, 74-year-old Algerian Ali Chauche aims to manufacture ships to meet local demand and to decrease imports. Offering the same quality at more competitive prices, Chauche carved himself a space within the local market.
I bought the ship from this company. I used to buy them in Spain, and that cost me a lot of foreign currency. But then I found this company that can produce what I need.
Establishing himself within his country, Chauche, who manufactures ships on demand, is now eyeing exports.
When a client comes from abroad, they will find good quality and good price. We can sell them to Libyans or Mauritanians because they don't make them.
He employs 85 people and hopes to hire more in the future. A major oil and gas producer, Algeria has suffered years of shrinking energy revenue with both prices and output sliding since 2014, and it's made little progress diversifying its state-centered economy. The government last year proposed a series of reforms aimed at confronting the challenge of falling energy revenue and a weak private sector. For Chauche, his business currently plays a role in diversifying the Algerian economy and could be a source of revenue once it's able to export.
Be yourself because the world recognizes and respects authenticity. That's the view of multiple award-winning author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. Speaking about writing as a tool potent enough to change the African narrative in the diaspora, she believes the focus should not be about the pressure of prizes and laurels, but for aspiring authors to be genuine and confident about who they are in their storytelling.
When I first met my editor, the first editor of my first novel, I remember she felt that the African words might be distracting to an American audience. And I just really refused to let them go. I made the case that it was important for, what at the time I liked to call the emotional integrity of my story. But also I said to her, I've just read a novel by Saul Bellow. And Saul Bellow is one of the greatest American writers. And in that novel, there's a lot of French, untranslated, just French, right? Because he was writing about a character who spoke French. And so I said to her, if it's okay to have French in a novel written in English, published for an American audience, surely it's okay to have Igbo. And really, I think in the end, it's about the value we give to languages. And I also was very clear about calling my language a language, not a dialect. Because very often people will refer to African languages as dialects. And so I said, no, it's not African and it's not a dialect. It's a language. It's called Igbo. And Igbo has many dialects. So, but since then, of course, I think because Purple Hibiscus was read very widely in the US, and Americans clearly did not have a problem with the Igbo words, I don't have that much of a, I don't have anybody sort of pushing back about having Igbo words now. Actually, I think now the generation of writers coming up are much more confident, and many of them put in, our languages in their stories, and I think that's very good.
Well, to catch the full interview with Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, do watch Diaspora Network on Saturday at 7:30 p.m. And that's where we end the program today and for the week. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Layo Adegoke. Have a great weekend.